the Facebook Papers, the Texas abortion law, and Merrick Garland. I'm Mike Adekunle, and this is The Square Circle. Hello, and welcome to The Square Circle. I'm your host, Mike Adekunle. And joining us today are libertarian author and podcast host, Remso Martinez. Hi, Remso.
Sir, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Also with us tonight is Erin Matson, the executive director of Repo Action. Hi, Erin.
Hello, good to be here.
And we have conservative contributing editor for Newsweek, Peter Roff. Hi, Peter.
And Mike, good to be with you.
All right, so this week, Facebook was on the defensive as leaked documents painted a damaging picture of the social media giant. Here is CBS News coverage.
Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg is addressing the firestorm around his company.
What we are seeing is a coordinated effort to selectively use leaked documents to paint a false picture of our company.
That response came after leaked internal studies found Facebook posts incited violence, while the platform enabled human trafficking and struggled to police hate speech. The documents also reveal how Facebook rolled back safety measures after the 2020 election, allowing misinformation to spread ahead of January 6th. An internal analysis stating, "Our enforcement was piecemeal."
Those types of safety things are not the top priority. The top priority is growth.
A claim Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has denied, writing, "This idea that we prioritize profit over safety and well-being, that's just not true."
Erin, it seems that the papers all lead to one continuous theme of Facebook putting profit over everything else. They're currently have plans to rebrand as Meta. Is there going to be any consequences to these papers, and is it going to affect the rollout of Meta, or is it just going to be business as usual under a new name?
Yeah, well, let's not give any time to a cynical rebranding effort that's a desperate attempt to change the conversation. Look, we have people of all parties on Capitol Hill, senators and members of Congress who are alarmed at Facebook and the really destructive and toxic influence that it is having on democracy and on our public discourse. And this is from a wide range of perspectives. There may be different reasons that folks are upset with, but I think this is going to be long lasting, and we absolutely need to get some control over these social media companies, and in particular, the way that they're toxifying public discourse. It's sad that they have monetized anger and rage and fomented so much distrust between and amongst people, and really fanning the flames of violence.
Interesting. Peter, do you think that there is going to be consequences, or it's going to be brushed under the carpet after the news cycle changes?
Probably not, but it is encouraging to hear there's at least one company in America that's putting profits over everything else. That's the purpose of a company. It's to make money for its investors and its stockholders, the retirees in Florida who are invested in the 401k into those companies, the charter schools who have scholarship funds invested in mutual funds that own stock in Facebook. Making money is a good thing. It's part of what makes the free market system work. There are issues about the way Facebook behaves that cause concern. Conservatives in particular are wary of how the company acts, because it appears, and this seems to be confirmed in the so-called Facebook papers, that efforts are made to muzzle conservative voices. Some political consultants, like the guys running Terry McAuliffe's campaign for governor in Virginia, have figured out how to use Facebook to send people to faux news sites that promote McAuliffe and look like news. when in fact it's partisan propaganda. So, we're still working this all out, and I hope we will continue to work this out in a way that is consistent with America's free speech culture. What concerns me the most is if the national conversation is now happening online, that certain people holding certain views are prevented from participating in that conversation because Facebook operators don't happen to agree with what they say and aren't mature enough to understand that a person who disagrees with me still has a constitutional right to voice their opinion.
So Remso, it seems everybody's angry at Facebook for various reasons, but everybody's angry. Do they get away with this, or is there a real reckoning?
I mean, social media is like being in a long-term relationship with a toxic person. You know it's crazy, but the sex is great, so you stay. When it comes to Facebook, there are many things in life that you can't opt out of, but you can opt out of this. It's faux outrage. I was reading a book the other day that was talking about religiosity in the United States, and it said that 60% of American Protestants surveyed in 2019 say that they go to church on a regular basis. But when mainline Protestants were surveyed, only 20% of them actually did. What it shows is that this is one of those situations where people want to go ahead and come out with the grand plan. Everyone is a genius when things are going crazy. But it's also one of those situations where it's like Facebook isn't guaranteed permanence. The Roman Empire wasn't permanent, and they sure thought they were permanent. Standard Oil thought they were permanent, and they sure weren't permanent. When it comes to these things, we need to understand that people have more responsibility over themselves than they think. If you're fooled into doing something stupid online, it's easy to go ahead and blame them, much like it's easy to blame McDonald's for making you fat. But that's just the problem. If you don't like it, if it's making you a worse person, if you feel that's bad for the world, go ahead and stop it. But it's not the company's role to go ahead and stop it for you. It's your own.
Erin, I'm curious, based on Remso's last point, there's some people have to take responsibility for some of their actions and not blame it all on Facebook. But there's children specifically that was pointed out in this the Facebook papers as being targeted and pretty much being taken advantage of.
Yeah, and that's a great question, especially as a parent of a young daughter. I mean, we saw in the Facebook papers that Facebook knew that Instagram, its product, among young women and young girls who had body image issues, a third it said that spending time on Instagram was making it worse for them. And Facebook knows that. And all they care about is money, because they are, yes, as Peter has said, they are a business. They're seeking profit. But they seek profit in this unabashed way where they just honestly don't care if they're destroying people's lives. And so I do think that there is a balance to be struck in the sense that, yes, we as a society should look at ourselves as people too. And is social media good for us? And it's not just about regulating companies. But the fact is, Facebook needs regulation. But if you don't mind, I'd like to say one other thing, because Peter shared something that just was absolutely incorrect. The fact of the matter is, it has been documented in the press that Facebook overweights its advisors with conservatives and has actually allowed things to go through its speech rules that clearly contravene them. And in fact, new news out of the Facebook papers, for example, that Mark Zuckerberg himself was personally involved in a decision to allow content that clearly broke the rules, that stated that abortion is never medically necessary to save a woman's life. He allowed that to go through, knowing that it was false, knowing that it broke the rules. And that is the exact kind of thinking that led to the death of Savita Halappanavar in Ireland, where she begged for a life-saving abortion on her deathbed and was told by doctors that we can't do that because this is a Catholic country, as folks were saying in support of that abortion is never medically necessary to save a woman's life. That's just not true. And the fact of the matter is that Facebook has cowed down to the radical right repeatedly because they're afraid of them.
Well, if I can get back to your original question, Mike, I am sick and tired of people using children as an excuse for government intervention in our lives. The responsibility for what your children do rests with you, the parent. If you think that Instagram is harmful for your child because it has an adverse impact on their body image, if you think they're being bullied on Facebook, if you think that they're being reached out to by pedophiles on Twitter, take the phone away from them. Regulate their usage. Make sure that they go outside and play in the fresh air. It is a parent's responsibility to look out for their children, not the government's, because that leads to the government telling you how to raise your children. That's not what America is about. And so if you have a complaint about Facebook and children, you do something about it. Cut off the Wi-Fi, take away the phone. Don't ask for government to break up big tech because you're a bad parent.
Okay. And Remso, just a quick thought. You said people can opt out, especially the adults, and possibly if parents take the phones away from their children, they can do that too. But what do you think about this censorship thing and favoring Facebook playing a part in politics and picking sides? Is that something that they should just be allowed to do, or is there going to be any consequence?
I mean, I don't like it when any company gets involved with public conversations, but just because I think that Ben and Jerry are like, evil people doesn't mean I'm going to stop eating Rocky Road. That stuff's delicious. When it comes down to other things, though, it's like I think it was incredibly infantilizing, especially in 2016 when the Hillary Clinton campaign kept insinuating that Russian memes on Facebook were convincing people to vote for Donald Trump. Whether somebody actually did or not, who's actually dumb enough to let memes go ahead and dictate their life? Who's going to go ahead and only take their political information and their societal information from social media? I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it's wrong. That doesn't mean I'm not going to sit here and say the classic lie, which is, well, I trust the American people. That's something you throw out when you just don't have an answer for it. Some people are just dumb, and no one wants to go ahead and admit that.
Okay, I think we will leave it at that. Some people are just dumb. Okay, we got to move on. So also this week, the Supreme Court decided to take up the controversial Texas abortion law. Here is coverage from Ken's in San Antonio.
The question before these 9 justices is whether states can use private citizens to enforce laws and get around the courts. In Texas, police won't send doctors who perform abortions to jail because it's not technically a crime. Instead, the law allows anyone else to sue those doctors out of business.
If the court does not take action, it would be catastrophic, not just for abortion rights, but really for all civil liberties.
Planned Parenthood's Mara Posada says if the court sides with Texas, states could use this end around to pass whatever laws they want without oversight. Pro-lifers, though, hope the court's decision to keep the law in place until a final ruling signals justices' support.
We believe that every single day the Texas Heartbeat Act is in effect, that is a victory by itself.
Right to Life's Kim Schwartz says a decision in Texas's favor might also mean justices are ready to overturn Roe v. Wade directly. They'll get a chance to do so later this year with the Mississippi case.
So Remso, I want you to look into your crystal ball here and tell me how this is going to play out ultimately.
According to my crystal ball, I'm going to say the same thing I say on Super Bowl night. Get to me tomorrow, and I'll just go ahead and pick the winner. When it comes to the situation, I mean, here's my bias. I went to Liberty University, so I think that abortion should just be outlawed. So it's hard for me to give a really, a really objective view on this. My thing is, like, much like murder, we should go ahead and try and avoid it at all costs and prevent it at all costs and disincentivize it from all costs. So I hope that Texas wins. I don't necessarily understand most of the arguments going for it, because at this point, as I've read it, it's like, I understand the intention, but I think the enforcement mechanism, as somebody that likes to say that they follow the Constitution, I don't see that much of a strong argument for. I think there are flaws. So I think this thing is going to drag out. I think at the end of the day, the Supreme Court's probably going to have their way on swinging this, and whichever way they want to do it is how Texas will go. But I mean, there's a difference between the intention of a law and the execution of a law. And I think while the intention of the law is definitely something that I would support, I don't think the execution of it is constitutionally sound.
Okay. Erin, I know you have something to say about this. What are your thoughts on how this is going to play out?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, we need to look at the fact that it's been now nearly 2 months of a blatantly unconstitutional law in Texas, depriving people of access to the care that they need. And it's really created a reproductive health care crisis in the state of Texas. There are people who are now having to drive a new data from the Guttmacher Institute in order to obtain abortion care. It has now added more than 200 miles to a person's trip in order to get that care. So first and foremost, I'm holding the people who are seeking care right now in my heart and know that there are panicked and desperate situations of people crying. Look, I will say it. I am proudly pro-abortion. I am proudly pro-abortion rights. I will fight for everyone's right to access that care. This is a matter of gender equality and racial justice and so many things. My concern, but regardless of whether someone supports abortion rights or not, my concern is, are we a nation of laws or not? Is it okay for a state to just clearly contravene constitutional standards? What could be next? Could it be free speech? Could it be same-sex marriage? What else could happen? And then these vigilante schemes are just so patently scary. Again, it raises big constitutional questions. So folks have a reason to be really scared about what this anti-abortion Supreme Court is going to do. The right wing has worked for decades to stack the court to this point, and now we're here, and it is really scary.
So, Peter, do you think that this vigilante deputizing the public might actually come back to haunt conservatives, for example, maybe with gun rights or something?
Well, I think we have that now. We've got the DARE programs encouraging kids to rat on their parents who use drugs. I mean, we got all kinds of situations in American law enforcement where we not only depend on but encourage people to rat out their friends, their neighbors, their business associates, people they know at the gym. It's sort of like East Germany without the coercion in one sense. But as far as this case is concerned, it has not had the time to ripen through the lower court system that I think it should have been granted. There is no right to abortion in the Constitution. There is a right that Justice Blackmun, using a decision by Justice Douglas, invented. I think in that sense, it's bad law. The Roe decision ought to be overturned, but I don't believe that the Texas case will lead to that. I do think that in the last 50 years, since abortion was made legal, the public opinion has shifted. We know more about things like fetal viability, when an unborn child feels pain, when an unborn child appears to begin to think, to be a sentient being beyond a zygote or a blastocyst. And I think that's changing people's hearts and minds.
Interesting. Remso, do you think we can agree that perhaps this topic is not completely settled with the American public?
Yeah, I want to be fair on this one because everyone made good points. I mean, I agree with Erin in the fact that I don't think the argument right now that Texas is trying to make is constitutional. I think she was correct on that. But then I also agree with Peter with the fact that, as we look at surveys across the last 10 years, specifically starting in 2012, starting in 2011, right before the Romney-Obama election, America is moving towards a more pro-life direction. I would rather Americans as a whole understand, at least in my view, that abortion is wrong, that abortion is murder, and that should not be tolerated, than breaking apart the Constitution in order to justify that. So I don't think that this is going to be the last time we're going to be having this conversation. Each time everyone looks at this topic and they're like, oh, this is the end-all, be-all, we end up talking about the next thing. Just change the name, dates, and location, and we'll be talking about it 10 years later.
Okay. And to that point, there are other cases that are talking, that actually one other case will be heard almost at the same time by the Supreme Court that does address this. So Do you think Remso is right? This is something that's just going to keep coming up with different date, different time, different place.
I work in abortion rights. There is no question that this is going to be an ongoing conversation and battle. This is something that there are powerful interests. And in particular, the right wing has decided to make this its core voter mobilization tool. It was part of a backroom deal with folks like Paul Weyrich and others back more than 50 years ago when segregation was no longer a popular strategy to pursue. They decided to go for abortion. But I would just like to fact check something because I'm looking at Gallup polls and Pew Research, maybe not memes on Facebook or other places where misinformation is shining. But the fact of the matter is that support for abortion rights is actually at record high right now. And more than 7 in 10 people in this country are very strong for abortion rights. In fact, the anti-abortion pure viewpoint of wanting to overturn Roe versus Wade and make abortion completely illegal is shared by only 1 in 5 people in this country. So the Supreme Court, if they, we know where their ideological predilections are. If they actually follow that through logically, they're going to see a lot of backlash.
Okay, we got to leave it at that. Finally today, Attorney General Merrick Garland, he was grilled by Congress on his memo on school board meeting violence. Here's part of the exchange.
Mothers and fathers have a vested interest in how schools educate their children. They are not, as the Biden Justice Department apparently believes them to be, national security threats.
Senator, the memo, which referred to as one page, it responds to concerns about violence, threats of violence, other criminal conduct. That's all it's about. And all it asks is for federal law enforcement to consult with, meet with local law enforcement to assess the circumstances, to strategize about what may or may not be necessary, to provide federal assistance if it is necessary.
Judge, this is shameful. This testimony, your directive, your performance is shameful.
Okay. That's not correct.
Thank God you are not on the Supreme Court. You should resign in disgrace, Judge.
You've testified today, you're focused on violence. That's not what your U.S. attorneys, they work for you. That's not what they're saying. You haven't seen it because it's not a high enough priority, or what?
Question of priority. No one has sent me that memo, so I haven't seen it.
Okay, so Peter, does the call for his resignation, is it gonna get, does it have any legs?
The only way he's resigning is if there's an open Supreme Court seat. But I'll tell you something, this isn't the moderate Merrick Garland that was sold to the American people when Barack Obama picked him for the high court after the death of Justice Antonin Scalia. This whole business stinks to high heaven. And we now know that the National School Boards Association wrote this letter to Garland that produced the memo in consultation with the White House. So clearly there was a political objective here inside the White House to politicize school board meetings, but to call parents terrorists, I thought we were in favor of a vigorous democracy and full-on debate. So apparently, if I understand the new rules, if you think Black Lives Matter, you can burn down a city with impunity. If you think that your children shouldn't be taught certain things and you want to go speak in front of an elected body like your local school board, you're a potential terrorist and you have to be worried that the FBI is going to arrest you before you get to make your remarks. This is a very dangerous turn towards fascism. I'm not calling it fascism. I'm just saying it's moving in the direction of fascism.
So, Remso, do you think, as Peter just alluded to, no consequences or nothing will happen to Merrick Garland personally, but there may be some political consequences for the left, perhaps?
I think it's the same song, just a different day. And I'll take it a step further. I don't think we should have a Department of Justice. The fact that people are surprised an attorney general is following the political whims of the executive, like, my gosh, it's like people forget that Scooter Libby existed. At least that guy had some integrity. He ran out of town. But I mean, we see this throughout history. I mean, I don't think I have to remind people that J. Edgar Hoover was spying on MLK because they thought he was a communist who was planning acts of terrorism. This is going on for a long time. This isn't the first time. And I mean, let's look at Eric Holder. He was held in contempt of Congress, the first attorney general held in contempt of Congress when Republicans controlled the House and the Senate. And he stayed on for another year until Loretta Lynch came. This isn't a problem of partisanship. This is a problem of big government. When I heard what was going on with this situation regarding calling parents who were protesting school board meetings terrorists, and that they were going to use the Patriot Act to go ahead and do this, I started laughing. This is some Freddy Krueger stuff. The war on terror is home. It was all okay when George Bush did it because he was the guy that the right liked. He was the guy currently in the arena. And now we're starting to see, and this goes with the abortion argument, this goes with the Facebook argument, it always comes back to this. The bigger government grows, the more liberty contracts. And if you wouldn't want your worst enemy pointing a gun at you, how do you think he feels when you're pointing a gun at him? This is a bad situation.
Well, it's a lot to take in there, but Erin, as the previous administration, I know the left had a lot of issues with Barr. Is it safe to say that maybe there's some shades, the shoes on the other foot this time?
This is not in any way an analogous situation. Look, the Association of School Boards requested support from the Department of Justice. As a parent myself, I can tell you that of a young child, I can tell you that one of the most dispiriting moments that I had, and one of the hardest cries I had during the midst of the worst of the lockdown phase, was attending a virtual school board meeting, and to see the level of hatred that was coming out was scary. And so the fact of the matter is, I'm glad that Peter raised the specter of fascism, because Ted Cruz was standing up for someone who gave a Nazi salute in the middle of a school board meeting. I mean, the fact of the matter is we do need a return to civility in this country, and it's a scary, scary thing. But I think this whole thing is being overblown. The school boards requested support specifically, and there is in no way, I'm not even going to repeat this idea of local control being infringed. School boards are in control, but we do need to make it a safer space.
Of course, Erin, people are angry as they find out the kind of crap that is being crammed into the heads of children in public schools. They're mad because they're paying for those schools and they don't have the financial resources available to them to choose the private option. So they're stuck. And they're voiceless, and they're angry, but they're also not burning down cities. So I think they're still civilized.
Oh, just to clarify, I do believe Senator Cruz was not supporting doing a Nazi salute, but the man was making fun of the teacher, saying that they were acting like Nazis. I do believe that's what happened.
Well, I think that you're right. I don't think that Cruz was defending the Nazi salute, but remember, back in the 70s, the ACLU position, the pure liberal position, was let the Nazis march through the largely Jewish community of Skokie, Illinois, that was full of concentration camp survivors, because the Nazis had just as much right to peacefully express their values and their opinions as any other group in America. That's part of the free speech culture. It's hard. It takes maturity.
I think now we have to take some questions from our viewers. Let me see. I have a question from Facebook. From Myron Carr, and Myron Carr is asking about Facebook. The question is Facebook a net positive or a net negative for society in general?
I think it's about a wash, but leans towards net positive, because it's created a whole new way for Americans to communicate. And I think more communication is better. The flames that you see are sometimes the acts of deliberate provocateurs, but mostly It's just people using anonymity as an excuse for being immature. And again, America needs to grow up again in so many different ways. And learning how to behave responsibly in social media is no different than learning how to behave responsibly at a dinner party.
Remso, your thoughts?
I mean, I think that's just, I think the question itself is just very subjective. It's like water. You need water to live, but water can also drown you. You know, throughout my entire adult life, I've made my living on social media. Social media has provided me business and, you know, professional and personal opportunities that I would have never had otherwise. But it also gives me migraines, and I hate it 90% of the time. So, you know, I'm going to keep using it because I get enough out of it to, you know, kind of overdo the rest of it. I think it's just a personal choice at the end of the day.
Okay, Erin, what are your thoughts?
I like being able to say happy birthday to people on Facebook, but Facebook, it's hard for me to think it's positive right now when I reflect on what happened on January 6th.
Gotcha. Okay, so we have a question from Annie Black, and she asks, are there any other laws that outsource enforcement to private citizens the way the Texas abortion law does? Is there any other law that does that?
There's a simple answer to that. No, there is not. This law was crafted purposefully to evade judicial scrutiny and by anti-abortion people.
Okay, Peter, you mentioned something in your talk.
Actually, that's not quite true. The IRS, for example, pays bounties to people who turn in tax cheats. The Customs Bureau pays bounties to people who turn in smugglers. DEA pays money to people who turn in drug dealers. There are all kinds of incentive programs that exist that encourage people to turn in folks who are breaking federal laws.
That is interesting. I did not know that. Okay, and right now I guess we got to move on to the most underreported story of the week. And let's do ladies first. So Erin, what is your most underreported story of the week?
Yes, so my most underreported story of the week is we should be having more coverage of the Ahmaud Arbery trial that's starting to take place in Georgia.
Okay, Remso, you go.
Yeah, so about a month ago, a tragedy occurred. A whole bunch of zebras escaped from the National Zoo and been running around the District of Columbia and Maryland. I believe in the pursuit of happiness. They were running free. Don't get me wrong. I hated driving there when I lived there. I couldn't imagine what it's like to be a zebra. But a tragedy occurred this past week, which has gone so underreported, it might as well be a crime against humanity. One of those zebras was found dead in a deer trap. But what's even worse, some might say funnier, is the fact that the man who set the deer trap on his own property is now going to face a felony charge for killing an exotic animal. Ironic? I don't know. But what I do know is that I didn't hear about this until like yesterday, and that zebra's been dead for like a week.
Okay, can you top that, Peter?
Another underreported story is the fact that George Soros, the Hungarian billionaire, financier, market mover, and world shaper, has apparently been giving money to Jewish organizations to complain that complaints about Soros are anti-Semitic.
And that's all we have time for. Thank you to all our guests, and thank you guys out there for watching and listening to The Square Circle. I'm Mike Adekunle, and we'll see you next week.